Hey, this is Christoph with Scale Your Code, where proven developers teach and share their stories. Because I want to surround you with doers and people who build great products, so that you can learn from them and turn around that same day and build something amazing. And that's why we have today's guest, Michael Oostdijk. Michael is the lead developer for a company called Merge, which is based in Greenville, South Carolina. And when we first set up this interview, Michael specifically asked to talk about a framework called CakePHP and a library called Backbone.js. But even if you've never used them, you'll still get a lot of value from this interview. And that's because CakePHP is an MVC framework which helps you quickly develop applications, and Backbone helps you manage front-end JavaScript code. But I'll let Michael tell you all about that. And Michael, it's a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to speak with you.
So I'm really curious, I gotta ask you this question here. What is it about CakePHP and Backbone that excites you so much that you specifically asked to talk about them?
Well, as you know, there's a big push for moving towards front-end development. There's a lot of changes that are happening that people want to see instantly on the front end. They don't want to have to go to the server and come back and have it reload a new page or have it re-render the entire view. So the way that Backbone and CakePHP work really well together is Backbone can handle those front-end aspects and update the views very quickly without having to re-render the whole view. And CakePHP, as well as there are several other back-end systems that you could use, but CakePHP has a very nice REST system that works nicely with Backbone.
Okay, and what kind of projects does Merge usually work on?
Well, we actually have a large number of different types of clients. So we have some clients who are focused more on the marketing side, where all they really need are a good brochure type website, and there's a lot of focus put on copy and content and their voice and how they're coming across to either their customers or those who they work with. And then we have other customers who their website pretty much will run their entire business. So these are very big web applications that basically run their system, and they're in it every day, and they need a good interface to work in, and they need a strong back end that will be able to support the very custom things that they need to get done.
Okay, and do you work both on the front-end side and the back-end side, or do you focus on one side specifically?
Yeah, for a long time, I was working in both capacities, doing the front end to the back end. But my passion really lies in the programming of the back end of the more custom application-based projects. So I have experience in both. That's why I like the marriage of Backbone and Cake together.
That makes a lot of sense. So let's go ahead and dive right into Backbone then. And can you tell us a little bit more about what Backbone is?
So Backbone is really just a simple way of organizing your JavaScript code. If you've ever worked on a JavaScript application that has a lot of functionality and does a lot of different things, you can end up having one file that's just crazy massive with a lot of functionality that it's just really hard to work with. Or you have many different files spread across different views and actually included in the actual HTML files that are being rendered. It can become just a mess to manage. So what Backbone tries to do is it tries to make a few assumptions for the developer up front, and then allows the developer to put their code into a more organized way of just organizing the code.
Okay, so do you use Backbone mostly for larger projects? that require a lot of front-end interaction?
I've used Backbone for things that are just very small to things that are very large. The nice thing about Backbone is it's heavily based on rendering views, and a lot of times I'll have just a one-page. The user will need to update some information on a single page, and it's easier to just use the Backbone framework. I mean, it's very small in size, and just reuse that over and over again, and it works well with small or large applications.
Okay, and so I feel like MVC is really popular with back-end development specifically, but maybe not so much with front-end. So can you walk us through how an MVC works in Backbone in terms that would maybe help a front-end developer who's not so familiar with MVC wrap their head around that concept?
Sure. So really MVC, and the reason why I use Backbone so much, because I come from a back-end background, it's easier for me to push right into that. And so in Backbone, you can mirror your application in any way that you want to a back-end system. But as far as MVC goes, with Backbone, Backbone gives you the tools to start organizing your code. So let me give you an example. In MVC, you obviously have your model, your view, and your controller. Your model is where your data is stored. Your controller is usually where you make modifications to your data and prepare it for output, which your view handles. In Backbone, they have a very similar functionality with that. They have what are called models. They have collections, which is a type of model. They have controllers. You can create your own controller based on a view, and you can obviously make views, which are it's kind of a controller and a view are kind of the same in Backbone, and then okay. Templates are actually what gets rendered out, and you can do that. You can handle templates however you need to using the Backbone uses underscore, so you can use that, or you can use your own templating system like handlebars or something similar.
Okay, so really you've got the model and the view and the controller, and you're just passing information from one to the other, and then at the end you're rendering it on the page or something like that, right?
Right.
Is that the gist of it? Okay. So why use models instead of just simply storing data in the DOM? Like, for example, if you have data-name equals Michael or something like that, why can't you just get some jQuery to look it up in HTML5 and use that information? Why do you have to use models, or why would you want to use models?
It's just a nice separation of concerns. So the reason that you have models is so that your data is separate from your view. If okay. you are outputting your data tags into HTML5, that means your data is directly stored with your HTML, which is generally not a nice way to handle data and information. Also, another thing that's nice about the models in Backbone is it allows you to store this information in a server somewhere. So many times we'll have projects where we want to pull information from a remote source, and if that information was just stored in HTML somewhere, we'd be updating HTML files. Instead, we can abstract that data out into either a SQL server or pretty much or JavaScript file, like a key value pair database okay. that is easier to access.
Right. Okay. Did you have an example of that? When we were sharing screens earlier, I think I saw some kind of glimpse or something like that.
Yeah, so I can pull this up here for you.
Perfect.
All right. So can you see this here?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So over here on the left, you can see this is a Cake application, and you can see here's my controller, here's my model, here's my view, and then Cake stores most of its public-facing information in the web root, and then I have JavaScript here, and then I have this thing called Dash. Dash is from my perspective, it is a single page application. So if I were to load this onto a page, it is pretty much it's just a single page that does things,
Okay.
but it doesn't re-render from the server. So these views are all happening without rerunning, without refreshing the page. Only the parts.
So that's probably pretty fast, right?
Yeah, it updates very quickly. You can move back and forth between things, and you don't have to wait for it all to happen. So
I can see that getting pretty messy though if you're doing it all in jQuery using, like we were saying, the data attributes before. You'd have so many data attributes to keep in mind of, and I guess that's what they call the spaghetti code, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So one of the nice things about this is you can update the views just piecemeal. So I'm trying to find one with actual discussion in it. Let's see here. Well, I'll just pull this up. And if you click in here and then I add this discussion, you can see that I'm just replacing this view with this information.
Whereas if you weren't doing something like that, you'd have to refresh the whole page, or at least part of it, to get that information to pop up.
Right, and you can see that information just came right back in, and it's immediately available.
Okay.
So let me explain a little bit what happened there. This right here is actually what I would call a comment model, and then the view itself would be the comment view. And so when I add this discussion, I can set all these variables, and when I do save discussion, it sends it up to the server, saves it, and then it can immediately come back down and update my view without having to refresh anything. This didn't go away, this didn't change, because it didn't really need to. So what that looks like in here is you can see I have a comment model, and this is Backbone right here, using the model or the modular JavaScript format, the AMD format, which is also another big thing going around right now. But that's what allows me to break this up into multiple pieces so that I can pull it in via require and then spit it all out into one file if I need to. So let's see.
Do you usually use something like JSON if you want to hit the database or fetch something from the database? Is that what you're returning, some kind of JSON?
Yeah, so Backbone itself kind of determines that for you. And let's see here. Let's see if I can, I'll delete this one. And you can see here, it made a request to our comments controller to that specific message, and it issued a delete request.
Okay.
And I got a response back that said it went through properly. If I was adding a new discussion, and I saved it out, you can see, waiting for it to come back. You can see it returns back to me the new model that it's created.
And that's how you update it. Okay.
Right, and that's where all that information comes from. And you can see this was a post request with the data that I had given it to update with.
Okay, so if you run into some kind of issue where you're not receiving the data that you think you should be receiving, is that how you usually debug? You open a console in Chrome or something like that, and you look at what's being sent, what's being received?
Yeah, I'll use that as well, but in this case, I actually use a special view for that information.
Okay.
If I send a request to the server and it comes back not as expected, I'll just render out this view, and I can include this view on pretty much any other view that I have, and it can be inherited, so that I can basically show an error message that's consistent across all of my views. It's kind of like a little messaging system that let's see if I can demonstrate that. So if I change this assign to Grace, and then I know for a fact that once I'm not assigned, I can't add hours to this task.
Mhm.
If I do that again, you can see it comes
Okay.
back with the error. And this is what's really cool about this system is it actually goes to an API, updates that API, and then it re-pulls back into the actual application and then shows it
Okay.
back to me. So this response is actually coming from the API.
Okay. Okay. Did you write this, or is it
Yes.
a framework you found somewhere?
Yeah, this is the early beginnings of our internal task management system.
Okay, great. Do you have any other testing frameworks that you found online that you would recommend or that you ever use?
For testing front end, I really like Selenium server.
Okay.
It does a really good job of allowing you to automate testing.
Mhm.
That's probably the biggest one. I haven't done a whole lot of just function testing
Right.
in JavaScript. I use PHP unit for PHP testing, but for the front end stuff, that's a little bit different.
Okay. So have you run into any limiting issues with Backbone that frustrates you or anything like that?
With Backbone, a lot of the frustration comes from rendering the views and getting the data where it needs to be. Also, keeping track of the this context can sometimes be frustrating. There are times when I feel like I'm rewriting the same thing over and over and over again. There is a popular tool out there called Marionette.js, which helps with that to keep you from having to rewrite things over and over and over again.
Okay.
But I have not gotten into it yet that much. But yeah, it feels sometimes like I'm rewriting the same thing over and over and over again. And also, you end up with a lot of JavaScript files. Like this application itself is not big yet, and you can already see that I have tons and tons and tons and tons of JavaScript files in here. So it can get really difficult really fast with naming and finding the file that you need.
Yeah, it looks like you've got quite a few template folders and files in there. And I see you've defined a template in this errorview.js. You're pulling that from a different file somewhere?
Right, so you see here's the template, and then there's a plugin for require that allows you to just pull text, and you can see it references template error, which would correspond to template and error. And then it loads this template, which is just HTML with the standard underscore variable definitions.
Okay. All right, so let's go ahead and talk about some CakePHP then.
Okay.
What is CakePHP?
So CakePHP is, in their terms, it's a rapid development framework. And what it allows you to do is it allows you to bypass a lot of the initial setup things that you shouldn't really have to do every time you start a new project. So for example, they've abstracted a database layer where it allows you to interact with the database very quickly. And I don't think I've ever, I can't remember the last time I wrote a MySQL connect function to actually connect to a database. Right. So the main, the biggest enjoyment and the best part about it is it takes out those very low level tasks that you shouldn't really have to do every time you start a new project unless you really, really need that level of granularity control. And even Cake allows you to override some of those things that they've predetermined for you via like plugins and things like that.
Okay.
So, for example, just an example of an override. Inside of Cake, you have plugins, and you can write plugins to override pretty much every aspect of the framework.
Oh, okay.
And in this plugin, you see here I have models, specific models, and these models use a special data source that connects to an API to pull data. So instead of using these models to connect to our normal database, which is MySQL, it overrides that and uses these models and connects to an API. So when I do this model save, it saves to the API instead of our database, which is what I want it to do.
I got you. Okay. So is it really worth all the benefits? Because I see you again. You have quite a few folders and files here, and a lot of people say that some frameworks are too bloated and they load too much, and so you have speed decrease, you have performance decrease, you can't have as many concurrent users and things like that. Is it really worth not having to write your own custom functions and have things come out of the box like that?
I would say definitely yes, because of caching, you can pretty much mitigate any file loading issues that you come across to the point where you're pretty much, if you cache correctly, you're pretty much just loading straight HTML, which is the fastest you can get out to the browser. So it's really how much performance you really need. You have that performance and speed of development trade-off. Are you going to spend 50 hours writing a database connection that might save you a few seconds or not even a few seconds,
Right.
a few milliseconds on a request, compared to using those 50 hours to actually make your application do what you want it to do? And I mean, website connections and servers are so fast nowadays. It really doesn't make that big of a difference unless you're doing some major calculations. If you're doing those kind of calculations, it'd probably be better to write your own functions. But the Cake development team has done an excellent job of making these functions a lot faster and a lot more reliable.
Yeah, and I can see it being very beneficial from a security standpoint as well, where CakePHP has been around for so many years and so many people have seen the code and worked on the code. Whereas if you're the only person, or if you have a small team of people working on your own connections and things like that, you may miss some big security hole and have more security risks. So I could see that being pretty beneficial as well.
That's exactly right. The portability of the application is also helpful. When I walk into a project that has been written into Cake, I can usually figure something out fairly quickly, as opposed to walking into something that somebody custom built. And programming is about 80 to 90% thinking, and then the rest is actually writing the code. So the more time you spend thinking and reading the code, that's wasted time that you could be actually developing it and improving it or testing it.
Right. So I've worked with Laravel. I don't know if you've ever done anything with Laravel before, but it's pretty similar to CakePHP, at least from what I concluded when I was doing research for this interview. Why are you using CakePHP over some other framework like Laravel or Symfony or Yi or something like that?
For me personally, it is just experience. So I've visited a lot of groups that use Laravel, and I've looked into Symfony somewhat, but everything that I've seen in Laravel or I've seen in Symfony that is either like, oh, look at this new feature, or check this out kind of thing, CakePHP can already do it. So there hasn't been a necessity for me to pursue those other frameworks, and I can pretty much accomplish anything that I need to in Cake. So it's not like I don't need to pursue that at this point, so I haven't done that yet. It's more a matter of necessity as opposed to comparison of the actual frameworks.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. And this is also an MVC framework, which we just talked about previously with Backbone. Can you walk us through the steps of how a framework like Cake takes data from the model and passes it on to the controller and then to the view? How does the framework guarantee that, of course, if you don't have any technical issues, that your view will have this data, and how does it present it and pass it between files?
So Cake works a lot on convention. They have very specific naming conventions for files, which allows it to do a lot of magical things in the background that you don't have to worry about. So, for example, I have this model here called task. That corresponds to, in my database, it corresponds to a table called, you can see here, it corresponds to a table called tasks. And it'll always be the plural of the singular name that you have here.
Okay.
And then if you look under controller, I have a tasks controller. And then if I open up this tasks controller, I have a function called view, and I have a function called index. And these correspond to the view that you have here under tasks and then view. So your naming conventions are very, very important, which makes it a lot easier for somebody coming in to say, oh, I know exactly where the view file is for this function here because of the naming convention that was followed.
Right, okay.
So this information, when I do a find request, I do it on that model, this task, and then I can find it by the ID, and it pulls back that task, and then I set that variable here. In this case, I'm actually setting it as JSON because I want the view to actually render JSON, so that I can. That's actually used by the Backbone.
Oh, okay.
And then if you see in view, I don't have any information in here because this is all preloaded into Backbone. But if I did want this data here, I mean, I would just put the actual task and then task.
Oh, I see.
Title.
Okay.
So that allows it to keep a nice separation of the difference, the different pieces. But really, Cake is able to do a lot of powerful things because of the naming conventions.
So if someone's never used a framework or an MVC framework like this, how would you recommend that they start learning it? What would be the first steps now that you know what you know? If you could go back in time, how would you speed up that learning process?
Well, when I first started, I actually didn't start in an MVC framework. I actually started with writing my own MVC framework because it took doing that to help me understand the importance of an MVC framework. So when I was actually writing the database layer and writing the view layer and writing the controller layer and figuring out how all those talk together, I really began to appreciate all the things that the framework does for me that I don't have to worry about. It also helped me to get an understanding of why the data has to be in the model and how that communicates with the server. So that helped me in the long run. In the short run, with learning, if you just need to start with an MVC framework and you just want to learn it, I would definitely start with the Cake tutorial for writing a blog, because everybody kind of already knows what a blog has. They already know the components of it. It helps to follow that, to be able to write out your own application and see how Cake would write that type of application.
Okay. So if you start working on a project, what are the first steps you usually take? Do you start mentally planning out what kind of classes you'll need, maybe designing the classes, or do you just start opening some files, opening Sublime, and just start writing some code?
So 9 out of 10 of my projects will start in a database modeling program like Workbench. And what I'll start doing is I'll start thinking about the objects that are actually going to be created in this application. So let's see here. Let me pull up this. So I knew that this project was going to have tasks, and the tasks were going to have projects and comments and time. So setting up these and setting up all the information that I was going to be working with ahead of time allowed me to use the baking function of Cake, which the baking function of Cake will actually build your controller files and your model files for you with all the preset information that you need in them based off of your model.
Wow, that's nice.
And it is super helpful to get up and running very quickly. A lot of times what we'll do is we'll identify spikes in a project, things that I know are going to take a lot of time, or that I'm not 100% sure how I'm going to build them. And I'll go ahead and shoot ahead of like all the other pieces to the application, and I'll just develop that one piece so that I'm confident in knowing, okay, this spike is solved, and we have a plan for this. Everything else that we've done previously, we can do after that point, because we kind of know how it's going to go. But that custom stuff allows us to get really into that really quickly. And Cake allows you to, you can just start developing that stuff immediately. You don't have to have all the other pieces in place to start that.
Okay, and do you use MySQL most of the time for most of your projects?
Yeah, MySQL works really well for us, and CakePHP has many different database layers. So you can hook it up to PDO, you can hook it up to stateless databases like key value pairs. You can pretty much connect Cake to any database system that you want. And they do have several that are included by default.
Okay, and for most of your projects, if you have the choice at least, you're going to go ahead and use CakePHP and then some Backbone probably, and then MySQL database?
So
is that your preferred go-to?
Yeah, so with that, I would say it really depends on the project. If somebody's coming to me and they just want, or coming to us and they just want a brochure type website where they need to update some content every so often, and they're not really doing anything custom, it really doesn't make sense to use a framework. We just put them into WordPress and then use the advanced custom fields plugin and let them run with that. But if they really need something that is critical to their company, or they really need a special interface for this website, then that's when we start to consider something like Cake, which allows us that flexibility that we need.
Okay, and once you've got all your code, your project's good to go, how do you deploy it to your servers?
So we use something called Capistrano, which is a Ruby recipe. It's very similar to something like Vagrant Box or Heroku, where you're actually deploying to a server. So I've got an example here. This is the server where our what I was just showing you is located.
Okay.
And you can see here I have 3 directories, and under this releases directory there's 3 other directories, and they're numbered. You can see them here.
Right, okay.
And then if I go up, you can see current will actually open up that specific, the current version that is currently deployed. So when we deploy a project, we have it set up so that when we run cap staging deploy, it'll run through this deployment script that sends our information to, or actually it checks out our information from Git and then deploys the latest committed version to our server. And it also, you can see here, this actually loads up the Composer repositories that we're using for this one, so we don't have to keep any of that information in our GitHub account. And then a little farther on, when this script is finished, it'll actually set up some shared directories. So if there needs to be uploaded files or images that are handled in the system itself, it handles that as well, and it makes symlinks to it. So you can see this cache.js and cache CSS here. If I go into the actual current release and then go into webroot, you can see that there's symlinks to those things, because these files only need to exist on the server.
Okay.
Whereas locally they're compiled on the fly as we make changes.
Okay. So that really speeds up the deployment then.
Right.
You just type in cap, what was it, cap deploy or?
Cap staging deploy.
Cap staging deploy, okay. And you can go in that, is it a cap file? You can just go in and configure and change what they call, I think they call them recipes.
Right.
So that if you have different requirements, then you can configure that to match your own needs, right?
Right. So we have this staging RB file that's what handles the actual deployment, and then you have the deploy RB file, which this just points out what we have. We have staging and then production, and then this file here. I know it's a little hard to read, but we have our GitHub project, the user, what the domain is, and that deploys that, and then we have at the bottom here all the extra things that are run afterwards on the server itself.
So even if you're not a Ruby pro, you can still, it's not too hard to figure it out.
Right. I'm not very I don't have a big background in Ruby, so it's fairly easy to get going.
Very nice. I'll definitely check that out. So you use something called Vagrant Box, am I right?
That is
to manage your projects?
That's correct. One of the reasons we started going to Vagrant Box is we have a lot of developers come in, and we might have a contract developer, or we might have other developers, and if we're all working on different systems and then we're deploying to a single system, it's like, oh, well, it worked on my local host, but I'm not sure why it's not working on the remote. So to alleviate that, and to also mitigate the setup of local hosts, for example, I used to just use the built-in OS X, Apache, and PHP setup, but every time I would update my OS X, it would ruin my local host, and so I just got tired of that. So Vagrant Box, what it does is it allows you to set up a server that it's basically a virtual server that you can, it's a scripted virtual server.
Okay.
So exit out of here. And what I'm actually using is I'm using something called Puffit or Poofit. I don't know how you pronounce it.
So you're inside your virtual machine right now, right? You just SSH into it?
Yeah, I was inside my virtual machine at that point. Now I've gone back out of my virtual machine.
Okay.
And you can see in the directory I have this Vagrant file, and then underneath it this is this Puffit, PHP, it. I don't know.
I think I've heard people call it Puppet.
Okay.
I guess we'll stick to that.
Well, it is not to be confused with Puppet, the actual server management tool. This is just specifically to Vagrant, and they have a very nice website for configuring, actually configuring a Vagrant Box virtual machine. So if you want to, get up and running really quickly, this would be a fast way to get started with Vagrant Box. It is kind of slow. We will be working on our own personal recipe for this, but the ease of setting it up is very simple. For example, if I open the config file for it, you can see in here I have a whole bunch of settings, and these, based on this config file, all my localhost systems are built. So let's see here. Where is There it is. So you can see I have a list of websites in here that if you toggle them down, they have different things that are set. And whenever I do Vagrant provision, it will create a virtual host called lc.ambed.com. It'll make the document root there, and it'll add all these settings to that, which are custom to that that site. And then when I type in that URL in the browser, it'll pull up this site on the virtual box at that location.
Okay.
And you can set up what are called shared paths. If I go to var websites, this is on my local machine, but this data is shared between the virtual machine and my machine. So when I make an update on these files here, they're automatically updated on that virtual box. So it allows me to keep the configuration of the server the same, but still allows me the ease of updating files very quickly without having to push them to a remote box or anything like that.
Okay. Beautiful. Do you store all your, I see all these different websites or projects you're working on. Are they all on the same box, just different paths? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, they're all on the same server, which helps with keeping everything consistent. But you can see everything is under websites, ANMED app, and then, for example, the one I was showing earlier, this is in var websites hub app.
Oh, okay. Actually, I haven't been doing it that way. Every time I would make a new box, I'm not using the Puppet or Puffet or whatever. I'm using one called Protobox. I don't think it has as many features, but every time I would make a new one instead of going that way and storing it all in the same config file. So I'm definitely gonna get away from this video and try that out right away. That looks a lot better.
Yeah, I mean, it's helpful when you work on so many different projects. If you're just working on a single project, it's probably better to just do one Vagrant box per thing. But we have so many different sites, it wouldn't make sense for us. It'd be a administrative nightmare to handle all that.
Right. Well, Michael, thank you so much for your time. I learned a lot from this interview. I'm sure our viewers will also learn a lot from it. Do you have any way for people to get in touch with you if they have anything they want to share with you or anything like that?
Sure. My Twitter handle is @saymikeo.com.
Okay. Perfect.
Or sorry, just @saymikeo. Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn as well. You can contact me through there, or you can just send a message to Merge and tag it to me, I guess.
Great.
But Twitter's probably the best way to get a hold of me.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for listening to this interview. And if you have any questions or any comments, please leave them in the comment below and let us know how this interview helped you out. Thank you guys for watching.